There's a lot of really great games out there that just don't get enough attention. Some of them are right under our very noses, such as games in the Ys series, and other series are quite well renowned but have single entries that many might not be aware of, and Final Fantasy Dimensions is a great example of this. I touched upon this briefly in my top 10 Final Fantasy games video, as I firmly believe this game truly is a diamond in the rough. Final Fantasy Dimensions, aka Final Fantasy Legends in Japan, was released in an episodic format via mobile phone devices in Japan only back in 2010. It did see a worldwide release on August 31st, 2012 on mobile iOS and Android devices. This latter form featured better graphics and sprite work, upgraded sound and music, and was an overall more streamlined version than the original that released back in 2010. It also released at a price point of $14, or $2 for Chapter 1 and $5 for Chapters 2 through 4 each. Obviously, purchasing the game in its entirety was the best deal. Being in an episodic format, the game splits time between the 8 main characters as the player completes the Light and Dark Warriors portions of each chapter. It is only at the last chapter that all 8 characters finally come together as one party. And the game itself is a love letter to the pixelated Final Fantasy entries in the main series, i.e. the 1st through 6th entries. Battles pull the ATB battle system of the 4th through 6th entries, while also using the job system from the odd-numbered series, with heroes that join the various parties with fixed classes, like in the even-number series. The game is also awash of Easter eggs. Some of these are obvious, such as character names pulled from previous games, and not just Cid either. We've got Matoya and Bicky from the first one, Ricard from the second, Luge from the fourth, and more. While music is nearly all original, at least the victory fanfare plays when the player emerges victorious from battle. There's also Easter eggs as seen in the dialogue, such as main character Alba making a number of references to Final Fantasy VII. Main character similarities can be seen to other Final Fantasy games too. Noct has a demeanor and personality similar to that of Squall from Final Fantasy VIII. Alba and Dusk are twins from Mysidia, just like Porum and Palom from Final Fantasy IV. And Sol himself visually looks to be modeled after the fighter class from Final Fantasy I. The story itself takes place on a world ravaged by war, only for balance and peace achieved by the Avalon Empire. This is a world where, like many classic Final Fantasy games, we're in a medieval-like setting with castles and knights. Dimensions leans a bit heavier even into earlier entries, such as humanoid creatures like elves and dwarves, with the former not having been seen since the first Final Fantasy entry. We are introduced to citizens of the Kingdom of Lux, Sol, Glaive, Diana, and Aegis. They are instructed by their king to go to the Crystal Shrine, where our 4 other main characters are headed. Noct, Alba, Dusk, and Sarah were prisoners of the Empire and are instructed to steal the crystal from within this shrine. All 8 individuals run into the crystal's guardian. Upon its defeat, the crystal shatters and the world splits in 2. Once completed with this prologue, the story splits between the 2 parties, who were also split into 2 sets of 4. We see Sol, Aegis, Sarah, and Dusk become the Light Warriors, with Noct, Glaive, Diana, and Alba becoming the Dark Warriors. The idea of 2 sets of warriors is a reference to the 3rd Final Fantasy, and this is pretty much how the story progresses. I won't spoil anything beyond this point here. If you've played Final Fantasy games before, you're going to be hit with a bunch of aha moments or I understood that reference portions. If you haven't played a classic style Final Fantasy entry, the story quality is roughly akin to something from the Super Nintendo era. I'd put it at about the level of Final Fantasy IV. For the uninitiated, this means don't get into the game just for the story. This entry is more about that feeling of recapturing a game from earlier eras of gaming. And capture this era, this game does quite well. I feel the gameplay is where this game truly shines, especially with the job system and the battles. The system of jobs works much like how Final Fantasy V's system worked, though with a number of interesting departures. Once the player completes the prologue, both sets of warriors are given access to a core set of 7 classes that are standard for job-based Final Fantasy games. These include Warrior, Monk, Thief, red mage, white mage, black mage, and summoner. The 8th job is the standard jobless one that all characters start out as and always remain as an option. As the player progresses through the story and the warriors explore their worlds, they meet various heroes that they ultimately get the ability to use their jobs from. The trick on this is that these jobs are only available to that specific set of warriors that met that said hero. For example, the Light Warriors meet Gawain the Paladin and thus later get the ability to change into Paladins. The Dark Warriors meet Jinai the Ninja and can later become ninjas. When two parties meet back up and converge into a larger party of 8, the player can select which 3 characters to sit out of battles. The Light Warriors cannot become ninjas, and Dark Warriors cannot become Paladins. Each job has skills that can be learned as they gain ability points or AP. While the mages have the ability to cast spells, a lot of the physical abilities also have their own set of abilities specific to them that consume magic points. Many of these jobs also have passives such as speed plus 10% that they can learn through gaining AP, which can be equipped on to other jobs. This is similar to how Final Fantasy V worked, although in that, the 5th entry only allowed 1 slot to be equipped, whereas Dimensions has 2. Each of the characters can learn something called fusion abilities. These require 2 different abilities from 2 different jobs to be learned or to be triggered. The ability for one of the 2 must be selected and used in battle for the fusion ability to hit. The annoying part of this is that it's randomly triggered at an undetermined percentage rate. Though, once it does hit, the ability is learned permanently for that character and stored for them to be able to use and be accessible via the F-ability option. This is where the Light and Dark Warriors not having all of the jobs gives the overall party in the last chapter some interesting variety. If a character has learned Swift Shanty as a bard and can cast Haste as a white mage, the player should go into a battle and execute one of these abilities until the fusion ability of Hastega randomly occurs in its place. Now that the character has the ability to cast Haste on all characters at once, it becomes a greater combination than the 2 original abilities, though Bard is only something available for the Light Warriors, not the Dark ones. The difficulty itself of the game does ramp up quite a bit in the 3rd chapter, so having a good idea of what great fusion abilities to look for is quite ideal. At this point, I'd recommend looking up an online guide from GameFAQs.com or FinalFantasy.fandom.com if you're interested in checking this game out and looking for these abilities. Another comparison to the 5th entry is that its freelancer ability was overpowered when all the jobs were mastered. This is definitely not the case in Final Fantasy Dimensions. The job equivalent here would be the aforementioned jobless title. While mastering all the jobs does allow for 6 skills to be equipped instead of the standard 4 for this, jobless doesn't inherit any of the stats or passive abilities like characters did in Final Fantasy V's Freelancer. This means it's better to equip a job in Dimensions, as stats such as hit points, magic points, strength, and the like are pretty abysmal for the level 99 jobless. Equipping a job, especially one that has a high job level earned, is beneficial since there's a 1% increase of stats per said job level. For the battles themselves, as I mentioned earlier, they are standard ATB or active time battle, where characters and enemies attack one another once their action meter has filled up. Getting into battles is something that will happen quite often. I'm guessing this is another reference to early Final Fantasy games, as those also had high random encounter rates. One annoying aspect with this is that the music for the overworld or dungeon the player is exploring resets to the beginning every time a battle is finished. Regarding the battles themselves, thankfully the auto battle feature is present and it speeds up these battles quite well. Depending on the strength of your mobile device, entering and exiting battles is super quick. One thing to note about Final Fantasy Dimensions aesthetics is that it shares the controversial style seen in the mobile versions of Final Fantasy V and VI from 2013 and 2014 respectively. While I felt this look didn't do these mobile versions of 5 and 6 justice from what they originally looked like, they were fine there. Honestly, I would have preferred these sprites to look something like from the 6th entry, but it is what it is. The monster sprites and overall environments in Dimensions look good in that they match the Super Nintendo Final Fantasy aesthetic quite well. Attack and spell effects look and sound great too. All of these look and sound like they could have come from a lost Super Nintendo entry that we never got. The music, while not done by the venerable Nobu Uematsu, still sounds great. Dimensions was composed by Naoshi Mizuda, and it features overworld music changes for when the player explores the light or dark worlds, depending on where the player is in its respective chapter. The standard battle music that plays also matches whichever world the player is in too, and when the characters merge into one party, this battle music changes to whomever is leading said party. While a lot of the musical themes are great, I did notice a lot of them repeat due to the long episodic format of the game, with many parts of the story having similar looking dungeons, ruins, mountains, and the like. Because I'm a simp for classic Final Fantasy games, I absolutely love Final Fantasy Dimensions, and it's damn near criminal that SquareEnix hasn't done anything to port or release this game beyond mobile systems back from over 10 years ago. I probably would put this on par with Final Fantasy IX as around my 4th favorite overall Final Fantasy game, if I'd have put this within the bounds of measurement for top Final Fantasy game. Maybe Square Enix would include this game in the console version of the Pixel remasters coming later this spring as a surprise, or maybe they'll give this entry the HD 2D treatment like they did with the great Live Alive. Either way, I can't recommend this game enough, and it should still be available on mobile, iOS, and Google Play storefronts. One last footnote to mention, there is a Final Fantasy Dimensions 2 that was released in Japan only in 2015 as a free-to-play game. The sequel was every bit a sequel to the first Dimensions game, like Final Fantasy II was a sequel to the first entry, meaning there's no correlation between Dimensions 1 and 2. The director of Dimensions 2, Takashi Tokita, had stated he'd used a number of concepts from Chrono Break, the unreleased concept they had for another sequel to the Chrono Trigger series, as the basis for this second Dimensions game. Tokita did direct the original Chrono Trigger after all. Now, have you heard of Final Fantasy Dimensions at all? If not, the prologue is free and you can download it and try it yourself on your mobile device. Let me know in the comments section if this is something you'd be interested in playing and checking out. Please like, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. Thanks for watching and have a great day.